The year 1925 found England at a peculiar crossroads in its long and storied history. The Great War had ended just 7 years prior, leaving scars both visible and invisible across the nation. The streets of London, Manchester, Birmingham, and countless other cities bore the weight of remembrance. As war memorials began to the landscape, each name carved in stone a testament to the generation lost in the trenches of France and Belgium. Walking through London's West End in 1925, one would encounter a city of stark contrasts. Grand Victorian buildings stood alongside newer constructions, their facades blackened by decades of coal smoke. The Thames flowed as it always had, but now it was crossed by both ancient stone bridges and modern steel structures. Motor cars were becoming increasingly common, though they still shared the roads with horse-drawn carts, creating a symphony of honking horns and clopping hooves that defined the urban soundscape. The British Empire remained at its zenith, stretching across a quarter of the world's land surface. Maps in schoolrooms were painted predominantly pink, showing territories from Canada to Australia, from India to vast swathes of Africa. The phrase, "the sun never sets on the British Empire," was not mere boast, but geographical fact. Yet beneath this imperial grandeur, cracks were beginning to show. The war had exhausted Britain's coffers and challenged the very notion of European superiority that had underpinned colonial expansion. In the industrial heartlands of northern England, life followed rhythms established during the Industrial Revolution. Factory whistles still summoned workers at dawn in cities like Sheffield, Leeds, and Newcastle. The coal mines of Durham and Yorkshire descended deep into the earth, where men worked in conditions that would horrify modern observers. These miners, covered in black dust, emerged from the darkness to homes where their wives would have prepared simple meals of bread, dripping, and tea. The working class lived in terraced houses that lined street after street, their brick facades creating endless geometric patterns when viewed from above. The class system remained rigidly defined in 1925. The aristocracy maintained their country estates, hosting elaborate shooting parties and balls that seemed to deny the passage of time or the lessons of the recent war. In great houses like Chatsworth, Blenheim Palace, and Highclere Castle, servants numbered in the dozens. A strict hierarchy governed life below stairs, from the butler and housekeeper at the top to the scullery maids at the bottom. Young women from rural villages still sought positions in service, seeing it as an acceptable path to employment and perhaps a chance to rise through the ranks. Yet change was undeniably in the air. The Representation of the People Act of 1918 had granted voting rights to all men over 21 and women over 30, fundamentally altering the political landscape. Women had tasted independence during the war years, working in munitions factories, driving ambulances, and keeping the home front functioning. Though many returned to domestic life after 1918, the genie could not be entirely returned to the bottle. In 1925, one could see young women in London's shopping districts wearing shorter skirts that scandalized their elders, bobbed hair that symbolized modernity, and attitudes that challenged Victorian propriety. The British Broadcasting Company, which would become the BBC, had been established in 1922, and by 1925, radio was transforming home entertainment. Families would gather around wireless sets, listening to news, music, and drama. This new medium was creating, for the first time, a truly shared national culture, where events could be experienced simultaneously across the country. In the countryside, traditional patterns persisted more stubbornly. The agricultural calendar still governed life in villages across the Cotswolds, the Lake District, and East Anglia. Harvest time brought entire communities together, and ancient festivals like May Day were still celebrated with maypole dancing and Morris dancing. Churches remained the social heart of rural communities, their bells marking not just hours but the rhythm of life itself: christenings, weddings, and funerals. The traditions of 1925 England reflected centuries of accumulated custom. Afternoon tea was a sacred ritual, observed across classes with varying degrees of elaboration. The upper classes took their tea in fine bone china, accompanied by delicate sandwiches and elaborate pastries. Working-class families made do with strong builder's tea and perhaps some bread and jam, but the ritual itself was universal. Sunday remained a day of rest and church attendance. with shops closed and activities limited by both law and social convention. Pubs served as crucial social spaces, particularly for working men. The local pub was where news was exchanged, football discussed, and community bonds maintained over pints of bitter and mild. These establishments were almost exclusively male domains, with respectable women rarely crossing their thresholds. Pub names, the Red Lion, the King's Head, the Rose and Crown, reflected the nation's history, heraldry, and monarchical traditions. One of the most significant events of 1925 was the return of Britain to the gold standard on April 28. Chancellor of the Exchequer Winston Churchill, who would later achieve far greater fame, made this decision in an attempt to restore pre-war economic stability and maintain London's position as the world's financial center. The pound was fixed at its pre-war parity of $4.86. While this decision was celebrated at the time as a return to normalcy, it would prove economically disastrous, contributing to deflation, unemployment, and eventually the general strike of 1926. Speaking of strikes, labor unrest simmered throughout 1925. The coal industry was in particular difficulty, with mine owners demanding longer hours and reduced wages. In July 1925, the miners threatened to strike, supported by transport and railway workers. The conservative government, led by Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, averted the immediate crisis by providing a temporary subsidy to the coal industry. But this was merely postponing the inevitable confrontation that would erupt the following year. In literature and the arts, 1925 was a remarkable year. Virginia Woolf published Mrs. Dalloway, a modernist masterpiece that captured the interior lives of Londoners on a single day in June 1923. F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby appeared, though its portrait of American excess seemed worlds away from austere post-war Britain. The Wembley exhibition, which had opened in 1924, continued into 1925, showcasing the British Empire's extent and Britain's industrial prowess to millions of visitors. London's theatre district thrived with productions ranging from Shakespeare to modern plays. The cinema was rapidly becoming the entertainment of choice for the masses. Silent films flickered on screens in purpose-built picture palaces that were ornate as cathedrals. Charlie Chaplin, though working in Hollywood, remained Britain's most famous cultural export. For a few pennies, working-class families could escape into worlds of glamour and adventure, at least for a few hours. Education in 1925 remained limited for most children. While elementary education was compulsory and free, secondary education was largely the preserve of those who could afford it or won scholarships. Grammar schools provided academic education for the brightest working-class children, but the majority left school at 14 to enter employment. Universities like Oxford and Cambridge remained bastions of privilege, though slowly opening their doors to a broader range of students, including women, who had only recently been granted degrees on equal terms with men. The British seaside holiday tradition was well established by 1925. Working-class families saved throughout the year for a week in Blackpool, Brighton, or Southend-on-Sea. These resorts catered to different classes. Brighton attracted both aristocrats and day trippers from London, while Blackpool was unashamedly working class in its pleasures. Pier entertainment, donkey rides, fish and chips wrapped in newspaper, and Punch and Judy shows were the order of the day. The seaside holiday represented a democratic leisure, one of the few spaces where class distinctions temporarily blurred. Sports played an increasingly important role in national life. Football had become the working man's passion, with massive crowds attending matches. In 1925, the FA Cup final was played at Wembley Stadium, which had opened in 1923. Cricket retained its position as the summer sport, with test matches against Australia captivating the nation. The Ashes series held special significance, representing sporting combat with the former colony that had grown into a formidable rival. Healthcare in 1925 was a patchwork. The poor relied on charity hospitals and hoped to avoid illness, as medical care could mean financial catastrophe. Tuberculosis remained a significant killer, along with other infectious diseases that would later be controlled by antibiotics. Women still died in childbirth at rates that would be unthinkable today. The National Health Service was still more than 2 decades away, and the post-war promise of homes fit for heroes remained largely unfulfilled. Housing conditions varied enormously. While the middle classes enjoyed suburban villas with gardens in newly developed areas like Metroland around London, accessed by the expanding underground system, the working classes often lived in overcrowded conditions. Entire families might occupy 1 or 2 rooms, sharing outdoor toilets with neighbors. Slum clearance programs had begun, but progress was slow. The contrast between Mayfair and the East End of London remained as stark as it had been in Victorian times. One remarkable incident from 1925 deserves special mention. The discovery of the Piltdown Man hoax was beginning to be questioned by some scientists, though it would not be definitively exposed until 1953. This supposed missing link had been discovered in 1912 in Sussex, and in 1925, it was still accepted by many as genuine evidence of human evolution. The hoax reflected both British national pride, the desire to have the earliest human remain found on British soil, and the sometimes questionable nature of scientific authority. Another significant event was the publication of Professor Archibald Menzies' translation of Mein Kampf excerpts in the Times, giving British readers their first glimpse of Adolf Hitler's ideology. Few in 1925 could have imagined the catastrophe that would unfold from this source within 2 decades. The exploration of the British landscape was becoming democratized through organizations like the Ramblers Association, founded in 1935 but building on walking clubs established earlier. The Lake District, immortalized by Wordsworth, attracted visitors seeking the sublime in nature. The Cotswolds offered chocolate box villages that seemed unchanged for centuries. Scotland's Highlands represented wild, romantic Britain, a place where one might briefly escape industrial modernity. Food in 1925 reflected both tradition and the lingering effects of wartime rationing, which had only recently ended. The traditional Sunday roast remained a fixture for those who could afford it: beef, lamb, or chicken served with roasted potatoes and vegetables, followed by pudding. Working-class diets centered on bread, potatoes, and cheap cuts of meat made into stews or pies. Fish and chips had become a national institution, providing affordable hot meals. Tea was consumed in prodigious quantities, usually with milk and sugar. The monarchy remained central to British identity. King George V, who had reigned since 1910, symbolized stability and continuity. Royal events were occasions for national celebration, and the king's annual Christmas broadcast, which would begin in 1932, would become a cherished tradition. The royal family represented an idealized vision of British values, duty, tradition, and hierarchy, even if the reality was more complex. Imagining England a century hence, in 2125, requires us to project current trends while acknowledging that the future rarely unfolds as predicted. Yet certain trajectories seem likely to shape the England of 100 years from now. The physical landscape of England will have transformed in response to climate change. Rising sea levels will have necessitated massive coastal engineering projects. The Thames Barrier, already upgraded multiple times since its original 1980s construction, will be part of an integrated system of defenses protecting London from flooding. Cities like Hull and parts of East Anglia will have required similar investments or, in some cases, managed retreat from the most vulnerable areas. The energy landscape will be unrecognizable from our current perspective. Fossil fuels will be historical curiosities, discussed in museums devoted to the carbon age. Offshore wind farms will cover vast expanses of the North Sea, their turbines possibly replaced by newer technologies we can only dimly imagine, perhaps orbital solar collectors beaming energy to ground stations, or fusion reactors finally achieving the breakthrough promised for so long. Every building will be both energy producer and consumer, with walls and windows incorporating photovoltaic materials as standard. Transportation will have undergone a revolution more profound than the shift from horse to automobile. Private car ownership will likely be rare in cities, replaced by autonomous vehicle networks that provide on-demand transportation. These vehicles will be electric or hydrogen-powered, coordinated by artificial intelligence to optimize traffic flow and minimize environmental impact. High-speed rail will connect major cities at speeds exceeding 400 kilometers per hour, making journeys from London to Edinburgh faster than current air travel. The question of flying will have been resolved one way or another. either through sustainable aviation fuels and electric aircraft, or through a cultural shift away from frequent air travel. Cities will have grown vertically and densely. London, Manchester, and Birmingham will feature skyscrapers that make today's tallest buildings look modest, but these will be integrated with extensive green spaces. Vertical farms will produce food within urban areas, reducing transportation needs and providing fresh produce year-round. Rooftop gardens and parks will be standard, with buildings designed to support biodiversity. The concept of nature as separate from urban life will have dissolved, replaced by an understanding of cities as ecosystems. The population of England will be both larger and more diverse. Immigration patterns over the next century will have created a truly multicultural society where the concept of a homogeneous English culture will seem as antiquated as the rigid class system of 1925. Languages from across the world will be heard in every city, and hybrid cultures will have emerged, creating new traditions that blend elements from multiple heritages. This diversity will be reflected in food, music, art, and social customs. Work itself will have been redefined. Automation and artificial intelligence will have eliminated many current jobs, but this will not necessarily mean mass unemployment. Instead, society will have grappled with questions of wealth distribution and the purpose of human activity beyond economic production. Universal basic income or similar systems may provide security, allowing people to pursue creative, caring, or community-building activities. The standard work week may be dramatically shorter, with more time devoted to leisure, learning, and personal development. Education will be personalized through advanced AI tutors that adapt to individual learning styles and paces. The traditional classroom may still exist, but as one option among many. Lifelong learning will be the norm, with people regularly retraining for new roles as technology advances. The distinction between work, education, and leisure will have blurred, with learning integrated into daily life through augmented reality interfaces and neural implants that could enhance cognitive abilities or provide instant access to information. Healthcare will have been transformed by genetic medicine, nanotechnology, and artificial intelligence diagnostics. Many diseases that plague us today, cancer, Alzheimer's, heart disease, will be preventable or easily treatable. Life expectancy will have increased significantly, potentially past 100 years as an average, creating a society with multiple generations alive simultaneously. This longevity will raise profound questions about resource allocation, retirement, and the meaning of a life that spans more than a century. The political system will have evolved, though predicting exactly how is challenging. Representative democracy may be supplemented or partially replaced by digital direct democracy, where citizens vote on issues directly through secure digital platforms. Artificial intelligence may play a role in policy development, analyzing vast amounts of data to predict the outcomes of different approaches. The United Kingdom itself may look different. Scotland or Wales may have achieved independence, or conversely, closer European integration may have resumed in some form. Climate change will have forced adaptations in agriculture and land use. Traditional farming may coexist with high-tech solutions like laboratory-grown meat and genetically modified crops designed for new climate conditions. The English countryside, while still beautiful, will feature different species of trees and plants, with some traditional species struggling in warmer temperatures while Mediterranean species thrive. Rewilding projects will have created vast nature reserves where wolves, lynx, and other species absent for centuries have been reintroduced. Architecture and urban planning will reflect new priorities. Buildings will be designed for disassembly and component reuse rather than demolition. Materials will be biological or fully recyclable. Homes will adapt to their occupants' needs, with reconfigurable internal spaces and smart systems that learn preferences. The suburban sprawl of the 20th and early 21st centuries will be viewed as a historical aberration, replaced by denser, more efficient urban forms interspersed with wilderness areas. Culture and entertainment will be transformed by technology in ways difficult to fully imagine. Virtual and augmented reality will offer immersive experiences indistinguishable from physical reality. People might spend significant time in virtual worlds, raising questions about the nature of reality and human experience. Traditional arts, theater, literature, music, will persist, but alongside entirely new forms of creative expression enabled by technology. The concept of celebrity may have changed, with AI-generated personalities competing with humans for attention. The preservation of historical sites will continue to be important, but with new challenges. Rising sea levels may threaten coastal heritage, while increased tourism and population pressure will strain popular sites. Technologies like holographic recreation may allow people to experience historical places without physically visiting them, reducing wear and tear on actual sites. Places like Stonehenge, the Tower of London, and Canterbury Cathedral will remain important cultural touchstones, linking future England to its deep past. Social relationships and family structures may have diversified beyond current norms. With increased longevity, people might have multiple careers and partnerships throughout their lives. The concept of retirement at 65 will seem absurd when people routinely live to 120. Child raising might be more communal, with extended family networks and community involvement playing larger roles. Gender roles and identities will likely have continued to diversify and become more fluid. England's relationship with the natural world will ideally have shifted from dominance to partnership. Ecological principles will guide decision-making at all levels, from individual consumption to national policy. The extinction crisis of the early 21st century will be remembered as a near catastrophe that prompted a fundamental reimagining of humanity's place in the biosphere. Rewilded landscapes will support ecosystems richer than they've been for centuries, though composed of species mixtures different from any historical baseline. Technology will be pervasive, but hopefully more ethical and democratically controlled than today. Concerns about surveillance, data privacy, and corporate power will have led to new frameworks for governing technology. Open-source principles may dominate, with key infrastructure treated as public goods. The Internet's successor, perhaps a quantum network offering unprecedented speed and security, will be recognized as essential infrastructure like water or electricity. The memory of our current era, the early 21st century, will be complex. Future England may look back at us with a mixture of judgment and sympathy. Judgment for our slow response to climate change and inequality. Sympathy for grappling with rapid technological and social change without historical precedent to guide us. The COVID-19 pandemic, Brexit, and the rise of artificial intelligence will be seen as pivotal moments that shaped the trajectory toward their present. One hopes that the England of 2125 will have achieved a sustainable balance between technology and nature, individual freedom and collective welfare, tradition and innovation, local identity and global citizenship. The alternative scenarios are darker: a nation struggling with climate catastrophe, social breakdown, or authoritarian control enabled by pervasive technology. Yet if we trust in human resilience, creativity, and capacity for moral progress, we can envision an England that honors its long history while creating a future worthy of that inheritance. The hedgerows and village greens, the great cathedrals and industrial heritage, the literary tradition and scientific innovation. These threads will continue, woven into new patterns we cannot fully imagine but can work toward creating. The journey from 1925 to 2025 to 2125 is one of continuous transformation. England has been many things across its history: Roman province, Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, Norman conquest, medieval realm, global empire, industrial powerhouse, welfare state, and multicultural democracy. Each iteration has built upon what came before while creating something new. The England of 2125 will likewise honor its past, while being unlike anything that has preceded it, a future calling us to act wisely in the present we inhabit.